My husband Marcus grinned as he loaded his ex-wife's suitcases into our Range Rover. Delilah and I deserve this getaway, Victoria. The beach house will remind us of better times. I smiled sweetly and said nothing, watching them drive away toward our Emerald Coast property. What Marcus didn't know was that I was already there, sitting on the deck with Delilah's new boyfriend Ryan, armed with evidence that would destroy everything Marcus thought he owned.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're a subscriber, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Tell us a duh.
The confrontation that followed changed our lives forever, and it was only the beginning of his reckoning. The crystal chandelier in our Westbrook Heights dining room cast dancing shadows across the mahogany table as Marcus spread vacation brochures like a dealer shuffling cards. Our 3 children sat around the table finishing their homework, Nathan hunched over calculus problems, Sophia sketching in her art pad, and Lucas building something elaborate with his engineering blocks. "I've made a decision about the beach house weekend," Marcus announced, his voice carrying that familiar tone of authority that had once impressed me but now felt like nails on a chalkboard. He adjusted his expensive tie, a gesture I recognized as his tell when he was about to deliver news he knew would hurt. "We're all going to Emerald Coast?" Sophia asked hopefully, looking up from her sketch. At 14, she still believed family trips meant time together, memories made in the sugar-white sand where we'd celebrated so many birthdays and anniversaries. Marcus's laugh was sharp and cold. "Not exactly, sweetheart. Delilah and I are going. Alone. We need time to reconnect without—" he gestured vaguely in my direction. "Distractions." The word hit me like a physical blow. Distractions. 17 years of marriage reduced to a single dismissive term. Nathan's pencil stopped moving across his homework. Lucas's blocks scattered as his small hands went still. Even at 11, he understood enough to know something terrible was happening. "What about Mom?" Nathan asked, his 17-year-old voice cracking slightly. He'd inherited my dark eyes and his father's stubborn jaw, and right now, both were working against Marcus. "Your mother has plenty to keep her busy here," Marcus replied, not even looking at me. "Delilah and I have history at that house, real history, before your mother." He paused dramatically. "Before she complicated everything." I sat frozen, watching my children process their father's casual cruelty. The beach house had been my wedding gift from my grandmother, my inheritance, my sanctuary, my contribution to our marriage. Every shell collected on those shores, every sunset watched from that deck, every family barbecue in that kitchen had been orchestrated by me, while Marcus showed up for photos and took credit for the memories. "Daddy," Sophia whispered, her artistic sensitivity making her the first to understand the full implications, "why can't we all go together like we used to?" Marcus leaned back in his chair with theatrical satisfaction. "Because sometimes adults need to remember who they were before they got stuck with responsibilities they never wanted." His eyes found mine across the table. "Delilah understands me in ways that—" he shrugged. "Well, some people are just naturally compatible." The dining room felt suffocating. The walls seemed to close in as I watched my children's faces reflect confusion, hurt, and something else, embarrassment. They were witnessing their mother being publicly dismissed, reduced to an inconvenience in her own home. "But Mom planned all our best trips there," Lucas said quietly, his 11-year-old logic cutting through the adult manipulation. "She knows where everything is. She makes the best pancakes on the deck." "Delilah can make pancakes," Marcus snapped, irritated by his youngest son's unwitting defense of me. "She's actually quite accomplished, unlike some people who think keeping house is an achievement." I felt heat rise in my cheeks. Keeping house, as if the MBA I'd earned while pregnant with Nathan meant nothing, as if the consulting business I'd built and then sacrificed for his career was worthless, as if the financial foundation that supported his every ambition had materialized from thin air. Nathan pushed back from the table abruptly. "This is messed up, Dad." "Watch your tone," Marcus whined, but Nathan was already walking away, his footsteps heavy on the hardwood stairs. The next morning brought the weekly tennis club brunch, an event I'd organized for the Westbrook Heights community for the past 5 years. Marcus insisted we attend together, presenting our family as the picture of suburban success while his betrayal festered like an infected wound.
Victoria's been so supportive of my reconnection with Delilah, Marcus announced to Helen Carter and the other club members gathered around our usual table. His arm draped possessively around my shoulders, a performance of marital unity that made my skin crawl. Helen's eyebrows rose slightly. She'd known our family since Nathan was in elementary school, had watched me juggle career and children while Marcus played golf and networked. That's progressive of you, Victoria. Oh, Victoria's always been understanding about my needs, Marcus continued, his voice carrying across the patio where other families enjoyed their weekend breakfast. She knows that some relationships transcend ordinary boundaries. Delilah and I have something special, something that predates all this. He gestured around the table, encompassing our children, our life, our 17 years of shared history. Sophia stared at her untouched French toast while Lucas kicked his legs under the table, sensing the tension but not understanding its source. Other parents glanced over, their conversations hushed as they witnessed what appeared to be a public airing of private dysfunction. The beach house holds so many memories for Delilah and me, Marcus continued, his voice growing more animated as he found his audience. Victoria never really understood its significance. She treats it like just another property to manage, but for some of us, places hold deeper meaning. The beach house, my grandmother's legacy, the place where I'd learned to paint watercolors, where I'd brought my newborn babies for their first taste of ocean air, where I'd nursed my dying grandfather through his final summer. Marcus spoke about it like he'd discovered it, like he'd earned it, like my family's 4-generation connection to that stretch of Florida coastline was somehow less valid than his recent rekindling with his ex-wife. I placed my napkin on the table with deliberate precision, the linen settling like a white flag of surrender that wasn't surrender at all. The conversations around us gradually quieted as I stood slowly, every eye tracking my movement. "Where are you going, honey?" Marcus asked, his voice tight with the realization that his performance was about to be disrupted. I looked at him for a long moment, memorizing his face. The way his eyes narrowed when he sensed his control slipping, the way his mouth twitched when he was preparing another cruel observation, the way his hand reached possessively for mine, as if touching me could somehow reset the scene to his preferred script. I looked at our children, Sophia's face flushed with secondhand embarrassment, Lucas's confused eyes darting between his parents, Nathan's absence speaking louder than any words could have. Then I looked at Helen and the other parents who'd watched me organize bake sales and coordinate carpools and show up for every school event Marcus was too busy to attend. "I enjoy your brunch," I said quietly, and walked away. My phone started ringing before I reached the parking lot. Marcus's name flashed on the screen again and again as I drove home in silence. The calls continued as I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, as I pulled my grandmother's vintage suitcase from the closet, as I began packing with movements that felt both deliberate and dreamlike. Alone in the master bedroom that had become a battlefield of silent resentments, I opened my laptop and began the archaeological dig through our financial life. The documents Marcus assumed were joint were actually sole accounts in my name. The properties he bragged about owning were titled to me for tax advantages he'd never bothered to understand. The business success he claimed as his victory was built on credit lines I'd established using my family's legacy and my own pristine financial history. As I scrolled through investment portfolios and property deeds, one document caught my attention: the beach house maintenance records. For the past 3 months, Tom Bradley, our longtime caretaker, had been sending bills for extensive renovations. New deck furniture, upgraded kitchen appliances, fresh paint throughout. Marcus had been preparing the house for Delilah's visit, spending my money to create the perfect romantic backdrop for their reunion. I picked up my phone and dialed Tom's number. "Tom, it's Victoria Sterling. I need to ask you about the recent work on the house." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Oh, Mrs. Sterling, I was wondering when you'd call. Mr. Sterling said you'd approved all the upgrades, but I wanted to double check about the master bedroom renovation. That's a lot of money to spend without... How much money, Tom? Nearly $30,000, ma'am. New king-size bed, luxury linens, that fancy champagne fridge he insisted on installing. Said it was a surprise for someone special. The someone special wasn't me. I hadn't seen the beach house since Christmas, hadn't approved any renovations, hadn't been consulted about spending that exceeded our annual vacation budget. Marcus had been using my credit lines to create a love nest for his ex-wife, spending my inheritance to recapture their lost romance. But as I stared at the financial evidence of his betrayal, an idea began forming. A plan that would require precision, timing, and one crucial phone call to someone Marcus had never bothered to consider in his grand romantic scheme. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number Delilah had given me 6 months ago during Nathan's graduation party. We talked briefly about her new relationship, how happy she was to finally be moving forward after her messy divorce from Marcus, how grateful she was that I'd been so gracious about maintaining civility for the children's sake. Delilah had no idea her ex-husband was planning to use her for his midlife crisis. But her new boyfriend Ryan, the successful architect she'd been glowing about, might be very interested to learn about Marcus's romantic ambitions. I dialed the number and waited, my heart racing as the call connected. Ryan Hayes speaking. Ryan, this is Victoria Sterling, Delilah's ex-husband's current wife. I think we need to talk. The conversation with Ryan Hayes lasted 3 hours and changed everything. What started as a tentative phone call became a detailed strategy session between two people who'd been blindsided by the same manipulative man, just at different times in his life. Delilah has no idea, Ryan said, his architect's methodical mind processing the implications. She thinks Marcus has moved on completely. She's been worried about telling him about us because she doesn't want to disrupt the kids' lives. I laughed bitterly, staring out at the moonlit neighborhood where Marcus was probably sleeping soundly, dreaming of his romantic beach weekend. Marcus never considers the kids unless there's an audience to witness his fatherly performance. Ryan's voice carried a professional edge, the same tone I imagined he used when presenting building plans to skeptical clients. So he's planning to surprise her with this beach house invitation? Tomorrow morning, he's going to call her and present it as a chance to reconnect for the children's sake. He'll make it sound noble, like he's putting family healing above his own comfort. I pulled up the maintenance records on my laptop screen. He spent $30,000 preparing the house for her. Your girlfriend's ex-husband is trying to win her back with my money. The silence that followed was pregnant with possibility. Ryan Hayes hadn't built a successful architectural firm by backing down from challenges, and I could hear him calculating angles like he was designing a foundation that would need to support significant weight. What exactly are you proposing, Victoria? I'm proposing we both be there when they arrive. I'm proposing Delilah learns the truth about what Marcus is really offering, and you get to see firsthand what kind of man tries to steal back his ex-wife using his current wife's inheritance. By midnight, our plan was in motion. I transferred funds to cover Ryan's immediate travel expenses and booked 2 suites at the Emerald Coast Resort, close enough to the beach house for quick access, but distant enough to maintain the element of surprise. While Ryan arranged emergency leave from his Denver firm, I began the systematic dismantling of Marcus's financial safety net. The automatic payments that sustained Marcus's lifestyle, his lease on the BMW, his membership at the country club, his monthly massage therapy sessions, were quietly redirected to accounts he couldn't access. I moved methodically through our shared financial obligations, separating his assumed entitlements from my actual assets. At 6:47 a.m., Marcus's alarm clock woke him for his morning run. By 6:52 a.m., his gym membership card was declined at the club entrance. The desk attendant, someone I'd known for years through various charity events, gave him the news with professional courtesy tinged with curiosity. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling, but there seems to be an issue with your account. Perhaps you could contact your bank?" Marcus called me from the parking lot, his voice tight with confusion and nascent anger. I let it ring while I sipped coffee in the Tampa airport, waiting for my flight to the Emerald Coast. Ryan sat across from me, reviewing architectural magazines with the calm focus of someone accustomed to complex projects. "This is just the beginning," I told him, as my phone buzzed with Marcus's 15th call attempt. "He's going to spend the morning discovering that his entire lifestyle exists at my discretion." Marcus's credit card was declined at the gas station where he always filled up before long drives. The automatic car wash subscription I'd maintained for 2 years suddenly required manual payment. His favorite coffee shop, where he held informal business meetings and impressed potential clients, couldn't process his usual order. By 10 a.m., when Marcus had planned to make his romantic gesture toward Delilah, he was instead sitting in his driveway, making frantic calls to customer service departments that couldn't explain why his accounts showed insufficient funds. While Marcus dealt with his financial confusion, I sent carefully crafted messages to the people who mattered. The first went to Tom Bradley, our beach house caretaker, with explicit instructions about the weekend's actual arrangements. "Tom, this is Victoria. I'll be arriving at the house this afternoon with a guest. Mr. Sterling may also arrive with someone, but I want you to understand that I am the property owner, and any decisions about access or arrangements go through me directly." Tom's response was immediate and relieved. "Thank you for clarifying, Mrs. Sterling. I was uncomfortable with some of Mr. Sterling's requests about privacy and key access. It didn't seem right, given the circumstances." The second message went to Helen Carter, my tennis club friend who'd witnessed yesterday's humiliating brunch performance. "Helen, I wanted you to know that Marcus's comments yesterday don't reflect our actual situation. I'll be taking some time to evaluate our marriage, and I'd appreciate your discretion regarding any rumors." Helen called within minutes. "Victoria, honey, we all could see something was wrong. That man was talking about his ex-wife like she was some kind of prize he'd won. It was uncomfortable for everyone." The third and most important communication went to my attorney, Rebecca Walsh. I'd known Rebecca since law school, had referred several clients to her practice, and trusted her both professionally and personally. Our relationship meant she took my emergency consultation seriously. "Rebecca, I need to discuss immediate asset protection and potential separation proceedings." Rebecca's voice sharpened with professional focus. "What's the time frame we're looking at?" "This weekend. I need to ensure that my inheritance and business assets are protected before Marcus realizes what's happening." "Victoria, that's aggressive timing. Are you certain you want to move this quickly?" I looked across the airport seating area where Ryan was making his own calls, probably explaining to Delilah why he needed to travel unexpectedly to Florida. 2 people cleaning up the mess Marcus had created through his selfish manipulation. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. The flight to Emerald Coast gave me time to process the messages that had been accumulating on my phone. Nathan had texted from school, "Mom, Dad's acting weird. He keeps making phone calls and cursing. Are you okay?" Sophia sent a longer message. "Dad told us you're being dramatic about something but won't say what. Lucas is confused and I'm worried. Can you please call me?" Even Lucas, at 11, had sensed the shift in family dynamics. "Mommy, Daddy seems mad but won't tell us why. Are we still a family?" Each message reinforced my certainty that Marcus's cruelty extended beyond our marriage into our children's sense of security. He was willing to destabilize their world to pursue his selfish fantasies, leaving them to wonder what they'd done wrong. Ryan and I landed in Florida at different times, maintaining the appearance of coincidence that would be crucial for our confrontation. He texted when his rental car was secured. "Delilah just called. Marcus invited her for a healing weekend at your beach house. She's confused, but agreed because she thinks it might help the kids if their parents can be friendly." The innocence in Delilah's motivation made Marcus's manipulation even more despicable. She was agreeing to his invitation out of maternal consideration, wanting to model healthy co-parenting for the children she'd lost primary custody of when Marcus's legal team had outmaneuvered her less experienced attorney. Tom Bradley met me at the beach house as the sun began its descent toward the Gulf horizon. The property looked magnificent, restored to a condition that exceeded even my grandmother's original vision. Marcus had indeed spared no expense in preparing for his romantic reunion. "Mrs. Sterling, I have to say, this feels more right," Tom said as he helped carry my luggage into the house. "Mr. Sterling's instructions were unusual. He wanted me to prepare the master bedroom like it was some kind of honeymoon suite, but for his ex-wife. It didn't sit well with me." The master bedroom revealed the full scope of Marcus's delusion. A new king-size bed dominated the space, draped in luxury linens I'd never seen before. Rose petals were scattered across the comforter. Champagne chilled in the expensive mini-fridge Marcus had installed without my knowledge or consent. "Tom, I want you to document everything with photographs, every receipt, every upgrade, every change he's made to this house without my authorization." As Tom methodically cataloged Marcus's unauthorized renovations, I called Rebecca with updates on the developing situation. "The evidence of financial misconduct is even more extensive than we discussed," I told her, walking through rooms that had been redecorated for another woman's comfort. "He's used my credit lines for what amounts to an elaborate seduction setup." "Victoria, this strengthens your position significantly. Unauthorized use of marital assets for extramarital purposes is exactly the kind of evidence that influences asset division." Ryan arrived at the beach house as I was reviewing the final documentation of Marcus's betrayal. Tom had collected receipts, photographs, and email communications that painted a clear picture of deliberate deception. Marcus hadn't just been planning a weekend getaway, he'd been systematically preparing to present my family inheritance as his gift to his ex-wife. "Delilah's driving down tomorrow morning," Ryan said, accepting the glass of wine I offered him. "She thinks Marcus has matured enough to have a civilized conversation about co-parenting. She has no idea he's planning to present this house as some kind of romantic gesture." We sat on the deck where 4 generations of my family had watched the sunset, where my grandmother had taught me to paint watercolors, where I'd brought my newborn children for their first taste of ocean air. Marcus was treating this sacred space like a stage set for his midlife crisis. "There's something else," Ryan continued, his architect's eye taking in the expensive renovations. "Delilah mentioned that Marcus has been calling her more frequently lately, asking about her relationship with me. She thought he was being protective, but now I think he was gathering intelligence." The full scope of Marcus's manipulation was becoming clear. He'd been monitoring Delilah's happiness, waiting for the right moment to disrupt her new relationship. He'd spent months planning this weekend, using my money to create the perfect romantic backdrop, all while maintaining the pretense of a committed marriage with me. As darkness settled over the Gulf waters, Ryan and I prepared for the confrontation that would reshape multiple lives. Tomorrow morning, Marcus would arrive expecting to find an empty house ready for his romantic reunion. Instead, he would face 2 people armed with evidence of his deception and motivated by his betrayal. My silence over the past 24 hours hadn't been weakness or avoidance, it had been strategy, allowing Marcus to expose the full extent of his manipulation while I positioned myself to respond from a place of strength rather than victimhood. The beach house held decades of my family's memories, but tomorrow it would become the setting for Marcus Sterling's reckoning with the truth he'd been avoiding, that everything he claimed as his own had been built on foundations he'd never actually laid. Marcus's Range Rover pulled into the beach house driveway at exactly 11:30 a.m., 30 minutes later than his typical punctuality would have dictated. Through the kitchen window, I watched him circle the vehicle twice, checking his appearance in the side mirrors and adjusting his expensive polo shirt. Delilah sat in the passenger seat, her body language suggesting confusion rather than romantic anticipation. Ryan and I had positioned ourselves strategically. He sat on the deck facing the Gulf, visible from the driveway, but appearing to be simply another guest enjoying the morning sun. I remained in the kitchen, preparing coffee with deliberate calm, allowing Marcus to discover our presence naturally rather than staging a dramatic revelation. Marcus's key turned in the front door lock, and I heard his confident voice carrying across the threshold. Delilah, wait until you see what I've done with the place. The renovations turned out even better than I'd hoped. Marcus, I'm still not sure why you wanted to meet here, Delilah's voice replied, tinged with the wariness of someone who'd learned to question her ex-husband's motivations. When you called yesterday, you made this sound like it was about the children. It is about the children, in a way, Marcus said, and I could hear him moving through the living room, probably gesturing toward the expensive upgrades he'd made without my knowledge. It's about creating stability, healing old wounds, remembering what we had before everything got complicated.
I emerged from the kitchen carrying 2 coffee mugs, my movements deliberately casual. Good morning, Marcus. Delilah, it's lovely to see you again. The silence that followed was profound. Marcus froze in the center of the living room, his face cycling through confusion, anger, and dawning horror as he realized his romantic surprise had been compromised. Delilah looked between us with growing understanding, her expression shifting from confusion to embarrassment to something approaching anger. Victoria, Marcus said slowly, his voice tight with forced control. What are you doing here? Having coffee in my beach house, I replied simply, offering one of the mugs to Delilah. I thought you might want to know that your ex-husband has been planning this romantic reunion for months, using money from my inheritance to create what he calls the perfect healing environment. Delilah set down the coffee mug without drinking from it, her architect boyfriend rising from the deck chair to join our increasingly tense gathering. Ryan's presence clearly shocked Marcus, who had built his entire plan around the assumption that he understood and could control every variable. Ryan? Delilah turned toward her boyfriend with confusion. What are you doing here? You said you had a work emergency in Florida. I do have an emergency, Ryan said calmly, his professional demeanor intact despite the personal stakes. The emergency is that your ex-husband has been planning to seduce you back using his current wife's money and property while lying to both of you about his intentions. Marcus's face flushed crimson. This is ridiculous. Delilah, don't listen to them. They're obviously coordinating some kind of, he gestured helplessly, some kind of manipulation to make me look bad. Marcus, Delilah's voice carried the patient tone of someone explaining basic concepts to a child. I came here because you said you wanted to discuss co-parenting. You said you'd realized that our relationship needed healing for Nathan, Sophia, and Lucas. You made this sound noble. It is noble, Marcus insisted, moving closer to his ex-wife with the confidence of someone accustomed to talking his way out of difficult situations. I've been thinking about our family, about what we had before Victoria came between us. This house represents our history, our connection, our potential future. I stepped forward, pulling out my phone to display the documented evidence Tom Bradley and I had compiled. This house represents my family's 4-generation legacy, Marcus. The history you're talking about amounts to 3 summer visits when we were dating 20 years ago. The photographs on my phone screen told the real story. Receipts for renovations charged to my credit cards, email communications with contractors referring to the project as a romantic surprise, purchase orders for champagne, rose petals, and luxury linens intended to create what Marcus had described to vendors as the perfect reconciliation setting. Delilah studied the evidence with the careful attention of someone who'd learned to examine her ex-husband's claims for hidden manipulation. Marcus, you told me yesterday that Victoria had suggested this meeting. You said she thought it would be healthy for all of us. I never suggested any such thing, I said quietly. Yesterday morning, Marcus announced his romantic weekend plans in front of our children, reducing me to what he called a distraction from your rekindled connection. Ryan moved to stand beside Delilah, his presence offering support without possessiveness. Delilah, show them the text messages Marcus has been sending you about our relationship. Delilah pulled out her phone with reluctance, scrolling through recent communications from her ex-husband.
He's been asking about you constantly, Ryan. How serious we are, whether you're financially stable, if I'm happy with someone who doesn't understand our shared history." She read directly from Marcus's messages. Quote, "Delilah, are you sure this Ryan guy is right for you? You and I have so much history, so much foundation. Some people are just temporary distractions from what really matters." Marcus's manipulation was laid bare in his own words. He'd been systematically undermining Delilah's new relationship while preparing to present my family inheritance as evidence of his romantic devotion. The romantic weekend he'd planned wasn't about healing or co-parenting. It was about ego, possession, and his inability to accept that his ex-wife had moved on without him. "You spent $30,000 of Victoria's money to try to win me back," Delilah said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd finally seen through years of manipulation. "You lied to both of us about your intentions. You put your children through emotional turmoil so you could play out some midlife fantasy." "Delilah, you're misunderstanding," Marcus started, but she cut him off with a gesture that brooked no argument. "I'm understanding perfectly for the first time in years," she said. "You haven't changed at all, Marcus. You're still the same selfish man who thinks everyone else exists to serve your emotional needs." Ryan stepped forward, his architect's precision evident in his measured response. "Marcus, I want to thank you for helping me understand what kind of man Delilah was married to. It makes me appreciate even more how strong she had to become to survive your marriage." The insult landed with surgical accuracy. Marcus had spent months trying to convince Delilah that Ryan was inadequate, temporary, a poor substitute for their real connection. Instead, Ryan's dignity and loyalty were highlighting everything Marcus had never been capable of providing. As Marcus stood in the center of the living room he'd renovated for his failed seduction, I pulled out the legal documents Rebecca Walsh had prepared overnight. The separation papers were comprehensive, protecting my inheritance while ensuring our children's stability during the transition. "Marcus, you'll be served with formal separation papers on Monday morning," I said, my voice carrying the calm authority of someone who'd moved beyond emotion into pure strategy. "The beach house, our primary residence, and the majority of our financial assets are legally mine. Your access to them ends immediately." Marcus's face went through several expressions as the reality of his situation became clear. "You can't do this. We have children together. You can't just destroy our family because you're jealous of what Delilah and I had." "I'm not destroying our family," I replied. "I'm protecting our children from a father who's willing to destabilize their security for his own selfish fantasies. You did this to yourself, Marcus." Delilah gathered her purse and moved toward the door, Ryan following with protective awareness. "Victoria, I'm so sorry. I had no idea he was using me to hurt you." "You have nothing to apologize for," I told her sincerely. "You were trying to be a good co-parent. He was trying to manipulate both of us." As they prepared to leave, Delilah turned back to Marcus with something approaching pity. "The children will ask why their parents can't even be in the same room anymore. What are you going to tell them?" Marcus had no answer. For the first time in our entire relationship, his ability to spin reality to match his preferences had completely failed him. After Marcus, Delilah, and Ryan had left, I sat alone on the deck where my grandmother had taught me to paint watercolors, where 4 generations of my family had watched the sunset over the Gulf of Mexico. The house felt peaceful for the first time in months, no longer contaminated by Marcus's manipulation and lies. My phone rang with a call from Nathan. "Mom, Dad came home and he's packing suitcases. He won't tell us what's happening. Are you coming home?" "I'm coming home tomorrow, sweetheart. We'll all sit down together and talk about what happens next." "Is it because of what he said about Delilah at dinner? Because that was really messed up, Mom. Even Lucas knew something was wrong." The wisdom in my 17-year-old's voice reminded me that children see truth more clearly than adults who've learned to rationalize cruelty. Nathan, Sophia, and Lucas had witnessed their father's casual dismissal of their mother, and they'd understood the implications even when I'd tried to protect them from adult dysfunction. 6 months later, I sat in the same deck chair watching Sophia paint her own watercolor interpretation of the Gulf sunset. Nathan was inside working on college applications, his essays focusing on resilience and family strength. Lucas was building an elaborate sandcastle with the engineering precision he'd inherited from both sides of his family. Marcus had moved to a downtown apartment, his visitation schedule carefully structured to protect our children's emotional well-being. His consulting business had struggled without the financial foundation and social connections I'd provided, forcing him to acknowledge the difference between performance and substance. Delilah and Ryan had gotten engaged on Christmas Eve, their relationship strengthened by surviving Marcus's manipulation attempts. They'd asked me to attend their wedding, a gesture of healing that felt both surprising and appropriate. "Mom," Sophia said, looking up from her painting, "I'm glad you didn't let Dad take us for granted anymore." The sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, the same colors my grandmother had captured in watercolors decades earlier. The beach house remained what it had always been, a sanctuary for family, healing, and truth. The difference was that now only people who understood its real value were welcome to share in its peace. My silence that morning at the tennis club brunch hadn't been weakness. It had been the beginning of my voice. 2 weeks after the beach house confrontation, Nathan appeared in my home office doorway holding a manila folder thick with documents. At 17, he possessed a maturity that his father had never developed, shaped by years of observing adult dysfunction and choosing integrity over convenience. "Mom, I found these in Dad's old desk," he said, setting the folder on my workspace. "I think you need to see them." The documents revealed a pattern of deception that extended far beyond the recent beach house incident. Credit applications Marcus had submitted using my financial information without my knowledge. Business loan documents where he'd listed my inheritance properties as collateral for ventures I'd never heard of. Insurance policies where he'd designated Delilah as beneficiary while claiming they were for business purposes. "Nathan, how long have you known about these?" My son's face carried the weight of secrets he'd been protecting for months. Since last Christmas, when Dad asked me to help organize his office files, I didn't understand what they meant then, but after what happened at the beach house, he trailed off, his teenage vocabulary insufficient for the adult betrayal he'd witnessed. Sophia joined us, carrying her art portfolio. At 14, she processed the world through visual storytelling, and her recent sketches revealed more about our family dynamics than any therapy session could have uncovered. She spread her drawings across my desk, images of a woman standing alone while shadows loomed around her, children reaching toward an absent figure, a house divided by invisible walls. "I drew these during the worst fights," she said quietly, "when Dad would come home angry and you'd just disappear into yourself. I didn't know why you got so quiet, but I could see you getting smaller every day." Lucas wandered in from the kitchen, his 11-year-old presence a reminder that children absorb far more than adults realize. He climbed into my lap with the casual affection that Marcus had always dismissed as babying him. "Mama, are we poor now that Daddy moved out?" he asked, his question cutting to the practical concerns that occupy young minds during family upheaval. "No, sweetheart, we're actually more financially secure now than we've been in years." The truth was more complex than a child could understand. Marcus's financial recklessness had been steadily eroding our stability for years. His unauthorized use of my credit lines, his risky business investments using my assets as collateral, his assumption that my inheritance was available for his every whim, all of it had created a house of cards that would have eventually collapsed regardless of our marriage status. Rebecca Walsh arrived that evening with additional documentation that painted an even more disturbing picture of Marcus's financial misconduct. Her investigator had uncovered a pattern of behavior spanning our entire marriage. "Victoria, this goes back years," Rebecca said, spreading legal documents across my dining room table. "He's been systematically using your credit and assets for personal ventures while keeping you isolated from the details. The beach house renovations were just the most recent example." The investigative report detailed business partnerships I'd never approved, real estate investments made in my name without my knowledge, and a web of financial obligations that Marcus had created using my stellar credit history. He hadn't just been unfaithful with Delilah, he'd been financially unfaithful with my entire inheritance. The good news is that because these transactions were made without your consent, we can challenge most of them. The bad news is that unwinding this mess will take months of legal work. Nathan, who'd been listening from the kitchen, spoke up with the directness that teenagers use when adults are avoiding obvious truths. So, Dad basically stole from Mom for years, and now he's mad that she caught him. Rebecca's smile was grim but admiring. That's an unremarkably accurate legal assessment. Word of Marcus's behavior had spread through our social circle with the velocity that scandal achieves in close-knit communities. Helen Carter called with updates from the tennis club, where Marcus's membership had been quietly suspended after his dues check bounced twice. Honestly, Victoria, people are saying they always suspected something. Remember how he'd always insist on separate checks at group dinners? How he'd talk about his business success but never seemed to have cash when it was time to contribute to charity drives?
The pattern had been visible to outside observers, but I'd been too close to see it clearly. Marcus had crafted an image of success while systematically depleting the resources that actually funded our lifestyle. He'd been living as a wealthy man, using his wife's money while treating her as an inconvenience to be managed. Delilah called unexpectedly on a Thursday evening, her voice carrying a mixture of guilt and determination. "Victoria, I need to apologize more formally. I also need to tell you something about our divorce that you should know." The conversation that followed revealed another layer of Marcus's manipulation. During their divorce proceedings, Marcus had hidden assets and income streams that should have been considered in their settlement. Delilah had accepted a smaller support arrangement because Marcus had claimed financial hardship that was fictional, created by his systematic shifting of assets into my name to avoid his obligations to his first family. "He used you to cheat me out of fair support for Nathan, Sophia, and Lucas when they were younger," Delilah said. "I thought he was just irresponsible with money. I didn't realize he was actively hiding assets by putting everything in your name." Marcus's consulting business, Sterling Consulting Group, began unraveling as clients discovered the extent to which his success had depended on resources and connections that were never actually his. David Chin, the client who'd always made Marcus nervous, called me directly. "Victoria, I want to offer you a consulting contract," he said without preamble. "We've always known the real expertise came from you. Marcus was just the front man." Other clients followed David's lead. The business relationships Marcus had claimed as his victories were revealed to be professional connections who'd tolerated him to access my skills and insights. Without my behind-the-scenes contributions, his presentations became hollow performances that failed to deliver promised results. Within 6 weeks of our separation, Sterling Consulting Group lost 80% of its client base. Marcus was forced to dissolve the business and seek employment with a larger firm, at an entry-level position that reflected his actual qualifications rather than the image he'd projected using my support. The children began therapy with Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a family counselor who specialized in helping young people process parental dysfunction. Her approach focused on helping Nathan, Sophia, and Lucas understand that their father's behavior reflected his character flaws, not their worth as children. Children of manipulative parents often struggle with self-blame, Dr. Mitchell explained during our family session. They assume that if they'd been better children, their parent wouldn't have needed to lie or cheat or manipulate situations. Sophia's artwork began evolving from images of isolation and shadow to portraits of strength and rebuilding. Nathan threw himself into college preparation with renewed focus, his essays exploring themes of integrity and authentic success. Lucas started sleeping through the night for the first time in months, his anxiety easing as our household stabilized around honesty rather than performance. The beach house became our sanctuary again, a place where we could rebuild family traditions based on genuine connection rather than Marcus's manufactured drama. We spent weekends painting, reading, building sandcastles, and simply enjoying each other's company without walking on eggshells around someone else's unpredictable moods. As autumn settled over our new life, I realized that Marcus's betrayal had been a gift disguised as devastation. His selfish pursuit of his ex-wife forced me to examine the foundation of our entire relationship,
revealing years of financial and emotional manipulation that I'd been too trusting to recognize. The woman who'd carried Camille the purse at that resort lobby would never have advocated for herself so effectively. The wife who'd accepted being called extra luggage would never have had the courage to document her own worth so thoroughly. Marcus had intended to humiliate me into submission, to make me so grateful for his attention that I'd accept any treatment he offered. Instead, his cruelty had awakened a strength I'd forgotten I possessed, leading to justice he'd never anticipated and peace he'd never been capable of providing. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning exactly 1 year after Marcus had announced his beach house plans to our family. The return address bore the logo of Brennan and Associates, the prestigious law firm where Marcus had managed to secure employment after his consulting business collapsed. Inside, a formal request for reconciliation mediated through attorneys, his final attempt to avoid the consequences of his choices.
Nathan found me reading it at the kitchen table, where Marcus had once dismissed me as a distraction from his real love. At 18 now, my eldest son possessed a clarity about relationships that his father had never achieved. "Let me guess," Nathan said, pouring himself coffee with the casual confidence of someone who'd learned to read situations accurately. "Dad wants to negotiate his way back into a life he threw away." The letter was Marcus at his most manipulative, professionally worded requests for family healing and structured reconciliation discussions that carefully avoided any acknowledgement of his financial fraud or emotional cruelty. He presented our separation as a misunderstanding that could be resolved through proper communication, as if his systematic deception had been merely a failure to express himself clearly. "He's offering to attend couples counseling," I told Nathan, unable to suppress a bitter laugh. "He thinks this is a relationship problem that can be fixed with better communication skills." Sophia joined us from her morning art session, paint still drying on a canvas that depicted ocean waves in shades of gold and turquoise. Her work had evolved from the dark, fractured images of a year ago to vibrant expressions of renewal and strength. At 15, she'd developed an artist's eye for truth beneath surface appearances. "Dad called me yesterday," she said, settling into her chair with the careful grace she'd inherited from my grandmother. "He wanted to know if I missed our old life, if I thought you were being too harsh about the money stuff." The money stuff had become Marcus's euphemism for his years of financial fraud. In his revised version of events, he'd simply made some accounting errors that I'd overreacted to in my emotional state. The systematic theft of my inheritance had been reframed as misunderstandings about shared resources. "What did you tell him?" I asked, though Sophia's calm demeanor suggested she'd handled the manipulation attempt with characteristic wisdom. "I told him that stealing from someone isn't a communication problem, it's a character problem," she replied, "and that I'd rather live honestly with less money than dishonestly with more." My consulting practice had grown beyond anything I'd imagined possible during my marriage to Marcus. Without his need to be the visible face of every client relationship, I'd been able to develop authentic professional connections based on competence rather than performance. The office I'd rented in downtown Westbrook Heights hummed with activity as I managed projects for clients who respected my expertise rather than tolerating it. David Chin had become more than a client. He'd evolved into a business partner whose architectural firm regularly collaborated with my strategic consulting services. Our professional relationship was built on mutual respect and complementary skills, a foundation that Marcus had never understood how to create. "Victoria, I have a proposal," David said during our monthly planning meeting. "I want to offer you a partnership stake in Chin Architecture. Your strategic insights have been instrumental in our growth, and I think it's time to formalize our collaboration." The partnership offer represented validation that went beyond financial security. David recognized my contributions as valuable in their own right, not as support for someone else's ambitions. The woman who'd been dismissed as extra luggage was being invited to co-pilot a successful business based purely on merit. Rebecca Walsh provided periodic updates on Marcus's legal and financial situation with the professional detachment of someone documenting a case study in consequences.
His attempts to challenge the asset division had failed spectacularly when investigators uncovered additional evidence of his unauthorized use of my credit and financial resources. He's filed for bankruptcy, reported during our quarterly review. The business debts he accumulated using your assets as collateral have become his personal responsibility now that we've established he acted without your knowledge or consent. Marcus's lifestyle had contracted dramatically. The studio apartment he'd moved to after losing access to our family home had been followed by an even smaller efficiency unit when his bankruptcy proceedings eliminated his remaining resources. The BMW he'd leased as a status symbol had been replaced with public transportation and occasional rideshare services. Lucas, now 12 and developing his own sense of justice, had observed his father's reduced circumstances during their court-mandated visitation weekends with the analytical mind he'd inherited from both sides of his family. Dad's apartment smells weird, and he keeps ordering pizza because he doesn't know how to cook anything, Lucas reported after his most recent weekend visit. He asked me if I thought you'd consider letting him come home if he promised to be better.
The request revealed Marcus's fundamental misunderstanding of what had happened to our family. He still viewed his behavior as a series of mistakes that could be corrected through promises and good intentions, rather than evidence of character defects that had taken years to fully manifest. Nathan's acceptance to Northwestern University had come with a partial scholarship based on his essay about resilience and family integrity. His writing had explored the difference between performed success and authentic achievement, drawing on his observations of our family's transformation following his father's departure. "I want to study business ethics," he announced during one of our evening beach walks. "I want to understand how people like Dad convince themselves that fraud is just aggressive capitalism." Sophia's art had caught the attention of a gallery owner who specialized in emerging young artists. Her series, titled Reconstruction, depicted the process of rebuilding after betrayal, using mixed media to show strength emerging from broken foundations. The gallery was planning a showing for her 16th birthday, an achievement that would have been impossible when her creative energy was being drained by household tension. Lucas had joined the debate team at his middle school, channeling his analytical nature into structured arguments about justice and fairness. His teachers noted his unusual ability to identify logical fallacies and emotional manipulation in opposing arguments, skills he'd developed through years of observing his father's rhetorical tactics. The beach house had become our family sanctuary again, but with a deeper appreciation for its role in our healing. Weekend visits involved genuine relaxation rather than the performative family bonding that Marcus had orchestrated during our marriage. We painted, read, built elaborate sandcastles, and simply enjoyed each other's company without monitoring anyone's mood or managing someone else's ego. Tom Bradley, our longtime caretaker, had observed our family's transformation with the wisdom of someone who'd maintained property for multiple generations of owners. "Mrs. Sterling, this place feels like it did when your grandmother was alive," he said during one of his maintenance visits. "Peaceful, like the house itself can breathe again." The observation was more accurate than Tom realized. The beach house had been holding its breath during Marcus's attempts to transform it into a stage set for his romantic fantasies. Now it had returned to its essential purpose, providing a space for family connection and natural beauty. Delilah's call came on a Thursday afternoon in late spring, her voice carrying an unusual combination of nervousness and determination. "Victoria, I have something I need to tell you in person, something about Marcus that I think you should know before you make any decisions about his reconciliation requests." We met at a coffee shop equidistant from our respective homes, neutral territory for a conversation that Delilah clearly found difficult to initiate. She looked healthier than I'd seen her in years, relaxed, confident, no longer carrying the tension of someone navigating an unstable relationship. "Marcus has been contacting me again," she said without preamble. "Not romantically this time, but he's been asking about you. Specifically, he's been trying to find out if I think you'd be willing to consider reconciliation if he could prove he's changed." The revelation was unsurprising, but still disturbing. Marcus was using his ex-wife as an intelligence source, trying to manipulate his way back into my life through someone he assumed I'd trust because we'd both survived relationships with him.
Delilah shifted uncomfortably in her coffee shop chair, her engagement ring catching the afternoon light as she twisted it nervously around her finger. Victoria, there's more. Marcus told me something about your marriage that I think you need to know, even though it's going to hurt. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to a text message thread that made my stomach clench with recognition. Marcus's manipulative communication style was unmistakable. The casual cruelty disguised as friendly concern, the way he planted seeds of doubt while maintaining plausible deniability. He's been telling me that you were financially controlling during your marriage, Delilah continued, reading directly from his messages. He claims you used your inheritance to manipulate him into staying, that you threatened to cut off his access to money whenever he tried to assert independence. The lie was so audacious it took my breath away. Marcus had spent years systematically draining my inheritance while presenting himself as the breadwinner, and now he was attempting to rewrite history by casting me as the financial manipulator. But here's what he doesn't know I know, Delilah said, her voice gaining strength. During our divorce, I hired a forensic accountant because something felt wrong about Marcus's claims of financial hardship. I recently had her look into the financial records from when we were married, and Victoria, he was doing the same thing to you that he did to me. She handed me a folder containing financial analysis that painted a clear picture of Marcus's patterns across both marriages. During his relationship with Delilah, he'd systematically hidden assets while claiming poverty to minimize his support obligations. With me, he'd reversed the strategy, living off my assets while claiming them as his own achievements. The accountant found evidence that Marcus was siphoning money from your accounts to fund his lifestyle during our marriage, Delilah continued. He was literally using your inheritance to pay for vacations with me, gifts for me, even the engagement ring he bought me. You were unknowingly funding his romance with his first wife. That evening, I gathered Nathan, Sophia, and Lucas in our living room for a conversation I'd been avoiding for months. The financial records Delilah had shared painted a picture of deception that extended back to before our children were even born, and they deserved to understand the full scope of their father's betrayal. I need to tell you something about your father that's going to be difficult to hear, I began, watching their faces arrange themselves into the careful expressions they'd learned to wear when adult truths were about to be revealed. Nathan, now mature beyond his 18 years, spoke first. Mom, we already know Dad's been lying about money. We found more stuff in his old files. Sophia nodded, her artist's intuition having picked up on patterns that others might miss. The timeline never made sense. Dad would talk about business success, but we lived better when he was supposedly struggling. Even Lucas, at 12, had developed a sophisticated understanding of his father's character. Dad always has excuses for why nothing is his fault. Even when he got arrested for driving without insurance, he said it was the insurance company's mistake. The arrest had been another consequence of Marcus's financial collapse. His inability to maintain basic responsibilities like car insurance had led to legal complications that he'd tried to blame on administrative errors rather than his own negligence. I shared the revelations from Delilah's forensic accounting carefully, focusing on the pattern of deception rather than the specific dollar amounts. My children needed to understand that their father's behavior wasn't a recent development triggered by our marriage problems, but a consistent character trait that had shaped their entire lives. So, Dad was stealing from you even before I was born, Nathan asked, his voice carrying the weight of someone recalculating years of memories. The pattern was already established, I confirmed. What I thought was sharing financial responsibilities was actually him systematically taking advantage of my trust and resources. Sophia's response was characteristically visual. She began sketching while we talked, her pencil creating images of foundations being undermined, of structures that appeared solid but were actually hollow. Her art had become her way of processing complex emotions that didn't have adequate words. Word of Marcus's extensive financial fraud had spread through Westbrook Heights with the thoroughness that scandal achieves in affluent communities where reputation is currency. Helen Carter called with an update that reflected the broader community sentiment. Victoria, you should know that several other families have come forward with stories about Marcus. Apparently, he borrowed money from the Hendersons last year, claiming a temporary cash flow problem, then never paid it back. The Johnsons said he convinced them to invest in one of his business ventures, then couldn't provide documentation when they asked for updates. Marcus's pattern of financial manipulation extended beyond our marriage into casual friendships and social connections. He'd been using his reputation as a successful businessman to extract small loans and investments from neighbors who trusted him based on his apparent prosperity that was actually funded by my inheritance. The Homeowners Association is considering revoking his membership, Helen continued. Apparently, there's a clause about financial fraud that applies even to former residents. The social consequences were adding insult to the financial injury Marcus was already experiencing. His attempts to maintain appearances while living in a studio apartment had become increasingly difficult as more and more people learned the truth about his circumstances. Ryan Hayes had maintained occasional contact with our family since the beach house confrontation, checking in periodically to ensure Marcus wasn't attempting new forms of manipulation. His architect's systematic approach to problem solving had made him an invaluable ally in documenting Marcus's deceptive patterns. Victoria, I've been thinking about something Marcus said during that beach house weekend, Ryan told me during one of our quarterly coffee meetings. He kept insisting that the renovations were his gift to Delilah, but when I looked at the receipts, everything was charged to accounts with your name on them. Ryan had used his professional relationships to verify the contractor work Marcus had commissioned for his romantic reunion. Every vendor confirmed that payment had come from accounts bearing my name and social security number, despite Marcus's claims of personal financial investment in the project. The interesting thing is that Marcus seemed to genuinely believe he was paying for those renovations, Ryan continued. It was like he'd convinced himself that your money was his money to such an extent that he couldn't distinguish between them anymore. The observation highlighted something troubling about Marcus's psychology. His financial fraud wasn't just deliberate theft, it was self-deception so complete that he'd lost track of the difference between his resources and mine. He'd been living in a fantasy where my inheritance became his achievement through the simple act of marriage. Rebecca Walsh had been pursuing criminal charges against Marcus for the more egregious examples of financial fraud, particularly his unauthorized use of my credit to secure business loans that benefited only him. The district attorney's office had shown interest in the case as an example of sophisticated domestic financial abuse. The prosecution is offering Marcus a plea deal, Rebecca informed me during our final strategy session. Full restitution of documented losses, permanent restraining order regarding your financial accounts, and supervised visitation with the children until they reach majority. The plea deal would ensure Marcus faced legal consequences while avoiding a trial that would further traumatize our children. More importantly, it would create a legal record of his financial abuse that would prevent future manipulation attempts. He's going to take the deal, Rebecca continued. His attorney knows they can't win at trial with the evidence we've compiled. Marcus's pattern of deception is too well documented across too many years. Marcus requested one final meeting before signing the plea agreement, mediated through attorneys but allowing for direct communication. He'd insisted on meeting at the beach house, apparently believing that the location where his schemes had unraveled might somehow work in his favor. I agreed to the meeting not because I hoped for reconciliation, but because I wanted Marcus to understand the full scope of what he'd lost through his own choices. The beach house represented 4 generations of my family's legacy, and he needed to acknowledge that he'd never actually been entitled to any of it. Marcus arrived looking diminished, thinner, wearing clothes that suggested financial constraints, driving a borrowed car from his brother. The confident manipulator who dismissed me as extra luggage had been replaced by someone who'd discovered the difference between performed success and actual resources. Victoria, he began, using the tone he'd once employed to negotiate business deals. I think we've both made mistakes that we can learn from. Maybe we can find a path forward that works for everyone. The familiar pattern of his manipulation was still present, but it no longer had the power to confuse or intimidate me. I'd learned to recognize his rhetorical techniques, and more importantly, I'd learned to trust my own perceptions over his alternative interpretations of reality. Marcus, I said, my voice carrying the calm authority of someone who'd moved beyond anger into clarity, there are no mistakes here. There are choices you made consistently over 20 years and consequences that followed naturally from those choices. He shifted uncomfortably in the deck chair where my grandmother had once taught me to paint watercolors, his presence a jarring note in a space that had returned to peace. The Gulf waters stretched endlessly behind him, indifferent to his attempts to rewrite history through better presentation. I know I made errors in judgment, he continued, employing the passive language he'd perfected for avoiding responsibility. But Victoria, we built something together. We have children together. Surely that counts for something. The irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus was sitting in a house I'd inherited, surrounded by renovations he'd paid for with my money, asking me to consider what we'd built together. Even his final plea was based on assets he'd never actually contributed to acquiring. We did build something together, I agreed. We built a family where 3 children learned to walk on eggshells around their father's moods. We built a marriage where I provided all the financial stability while you took all the credit. We built a life where you spent years planning to leave me for your ex-wife, using resources you'd stolen from my inheritance. Marcus's face flushed with the familiar anger he displayed whenever his version of events was challenged with factual evidence. That's not how it happened, Victoria. You're being vindictive, rewriting history to make me look bad. I don't need to rewrite anything, Marcus. The financial records speak for themselves. The legal documents speak for themselves. Your own text messages to Delilah speak for themselves. I pulled out the folder Rebecca had prepared containing the complete documentation of his financial fraud. 20 years of systematic deception laid out in spreadsheets, bank records, and legal filings. The evidence wasn't emotional or subjective. It was mathematical proof of his betrayal. Your children know the truth now, I continued. Nathan understands why you were never available for his games or school events. You were too busy managing the fiction of your success. Sophia understands why our house always felt tense. She was absorbing the stress of your constant manipulation. Lucas understands why you moved out, because you chose your fantasies over your family. For the first time in our entire relationship, Marcus seemed to truly see the scope of what he'd destroyed. The confident manipulator who dismissed me as extra luggage was confronting the reality that he'd been the unnecessary burden in our family equation. They'll forgive me eventually, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Children always forgive their parents. Forgiveness and trust are different things, Marcus. Nathan is 18 and making his own choices about whether to maintain a relationship with you. Sophia is 15 and old enough to recognize manipulation when she sees it. Lucas is 12 and asking questions you can't answer honestly. The plea agreement Rebecca had negotiated included supervised visitation until each child reached majority, but Marcus would discover that legal access didn't guarantee emotional connection. His children had learned to evaluate his words against his actions, and the comparison wasn't favorable. "What do you want from me, Victoria?" he asked finally, the question carrying defeat rather than defiance. "I want you to sign the plea agreement and accept responsibility for what you've done. I want you to stop trying to manipulate your way back into a life you threw away. I want you to leave my family in peace." Marcus signed the legal documents that afternoon, his signature sealing the end of our marriage and his formal acknowledgement of financial fraud. The plea agreement ensured restitution, though the amount would take years for him to repay, given his diminished circumstances. As he prepared to leave the beach house for the final time, Marcus paused at the front door with the expression of someone who'd finally understood the magnitude of his losses. "I never meant for things to end this way," he said quietly. "You meant for things with you having both your ex-wife and my inheritance," I replied. "The only thing you didn't plan for was being held accountable for your choices." 2 hours after Marcus's departure, Ryan and Delilah arrived with champagne and congratulations. Their engagement had been strengthened by surviving Marcus's manipulation attempts, and they wanted to celebrate the final resolution of his interference in multiple lives. "To new beginnings," Ryan toasted, as we watched the sunset from the deck where my grandmother had painted her watercolors, where my children had taken their first steps on the sand, where 4 generations of my family had found peace. The beach house remained what it had always been, a sanctuary for people who understood its true value. The difference was that now only people who respect its legacy were welcome to share in its tranquility. My silence that morning at the tennis club brunch had been the beginning of my voice. The confrontation at this same beach house had been the completion of my transformation from victim to victor. Marcus had intended to humiliate me into submission, but instead had awakened a strength that would protect my children and honor my family's legacy.
The waves continued their eternal rhythm against the shore, indifferent to human drama, but constant in their promise that some things endure beyond individual betrayal. Love endures, truth endures, justice, when pursued with patience and precision, endures. And peace, once earned through courage and integrity, endures longest of all. The Westbrook Heights community newsletter featured a brief article about Marcus Sterling's financial fraud conviction. In a community of fewer than 3,000 families, anonymity was impossible, and the response revealed how many neighbors had been touched by his deception. Helen Carter called with news that surprised no one who truly knew Marcus. The Hendersons confirmed they'd never been repaid the $5,000 they'd loaned him. The Johnsons discovered that investment opportunity he'd presented never actually existed. My children had evolved remarkably during our healing process. Nathan, now at Northwestern studying business ethics, was using our family experience as the foundation for his research on corporate fraud prevention. Sophia's art had progressed from personal healing to social commentary that impressed gallery owners. Lucas, now 13, had developed an unusual ability to detect manipulation and dishonesty that his teachers found both impressive and challenging. "Dad called again," Lucas reported matter-of-factly. "He wanted to know if I missed our old house. I told him that stealing isn't a money disagreement, it's a crime." My consulting practice had grown beyond anything I'd imagined possible during my marriage. The partnership with David Chin's architectural firm had led to municipal contracts, including work with the city of Westbrook Heights on financial oversight policies. "They've specifically requested you because of your experience with long-term fraud detection," David explained. "Your case has become a reference point for understanding how sophisticated financial deception operates." Marcus's brother Richard had reached out to apologize for his family's failure to see what Marcus was doing. "He borrowed $15,000 from our parents, claiming you were having financial difficulties and were too proud to ask for help directly," Richard revealed. "We found out after his arrest that you never knew about the loan." Delilah and Ryan's wedding had strengthened their relationship through surviving Marcus's manipulation attempts. They'd created complete financial transparency in their marriage, using his negative example as a foundation for positive change. 18 months after the plea agreement, Rebecca Walsh called with news that was both predictable and shocking in its severity. Marcus had been arrested again, this time for attempting to defraud his elderly landlord through a rent-to-own scheme that existed only in his imagination. He convinced Mrs. Patterson that she could sell him her duplex through monthly payments that were actually just his regular rent, Rebecca explained, her voice carrying the weary tone of someone who'd seen this pattern before. When she tried to verify the contract details with her attorney, she discovered that the legal documents Marcus had provided were completely fabricated. The arrest revealed how far Marcus had fallen from his former pretense of respectability. Mrs. Patterson was an 83-year-old widow who trusted her tenants' claims about real estate investment opportunities, the same kind of misplaced confidence Marcus had exploited throughout his adult life. The prosecutor is calling it a pattern of predatory behavior targeting vulnerable individuals, Rebecca continued. Between his conviction in our case and this new charge, Marcus is looking at potential jail time rather than just financial penalties. The news should have brought satisfaction, but instead I felt a hollow sadness for the man who'd once been my husband and the father of my children. Marcus had possessed genuine intelligence and charm that could have built authentic success, but he'd chosen to use those gifts for manipulation rather than creation. Nathan's reaction was characteristically mature when I shared the news with our family that evening. "I'm not surprised, but I am disappointed," he said, his college experience having given him new vocabulary for processing complex emotions.
Dad had every opportunity to change his behavior after the consequences became clear, but he chose to keep lying to new people instead. Sophia's artistic response was immediate and powerful. She began sketching while we talked, her pencil creating spirals that grew tighter and darker as they descended. Her intuitive understanding of her father's psychology had evolved into sophisticated commentary on self-destructive patterns.
"It's like he can't stop," she observed, studying her drawing with the analytical eye she'd developed through formal art training. "Even when lying stops working, he just finds new people to lie to instead of learning to tell the truth." Lucas, now 13 and dealing with middle school social dynamics, had developed his own theories about his father's behavior. "Dad treats everyone like they're stupid," he said with the blunt honesty that teenagers use when adults have lost their authority through poor choices. "He thinks if he talks fast enough and sounds confident enough, people won't notice that nothing he says makes sense." My work with the city of Westbrook Heights had expanded into a consulting contract that addressed municipal financial oversight across 3 neighboring communities. The reputation I'd built through surviving and exposing Marcus's fraud had become a professional asset, establishing me as an expert in detecting and preventing sophisticated financial manipulation. "Victoria, your recommendations have already prevented 2 potential fraud schemes," the city manager reported during our quarterly review. "The oversight protocols you designed caught irregularities that our previous auditing system would have missed entirely." The professional success felt meaningful because it was built on genuine expertise rather than performance or networking. I'd learned to identify financial deception through painful personal experience, and now that knowledge was protecting other families from similar betrayal. David Chin had proposed expanding our partnership into a full-scale consulting firm that specialized in forensic financial analysis for both public and private clients. The business model would combine his architectural expertise with my fraud detection skills, creating something unique in our regional market. "We're seeing increased demand for professionals who understand how financial manipulation operates within trusted relationships," David explained during our partnership planning session. "Your experience with long-term domestic fraud gives you insights that traditional accountants and auditors often miss." Nathan's sophomore year at Northwestern had included a research project on corporate fraud prevention that drew heavily on his family's experience without violating our privacy. His professors had been impressed by his practical understanding of how deception operates within intimate relationships, leading to opportunities for advanced study in business ethics. "I want to specialize in family business consulting," Nathan announced during one of our weekly phone calls. "A lot of corporate fraud happens because family members assume they can trust each other without proper oversight. I want to help families create systems that prevent the kind of problems Dad created." His academic focus had evolved from personal healing into professional mission. Nathan was transforming his father's betrayal into expertise that could protect other families from similar destruction. Sophia's art had caught the attention of college recruiters who specialized in identifying talented high school students. Her portfolio demonstrated technical skill combined with emotional depth that suggested significant potential for advanced artistic education. The admissions counselor from RSD said my work shows unusual maturity for someone my age, Sophia reported after her college preparation meeting. "She thinks my understanding of complex family dynamics gives my art a perspective that most teenagers haven't developed yet." Lucas had tested into accelerated mathematics and science programs that reflected his analytical abilities. His teachers noted his unusual capacity for logical reasoning and his refusal to accept explanations that didn't align with observable evidence. "Lucas approaches every problem like he's investigating a crime," his algebra teacher told me during parent conferences. "He wants to see the proof behind every formula, the logic behind every theorem. It's impressive but sometimes challenging for classroom management." The forensic accountant who'd helped document Marcus's financial fraud had begun using our case as a teaching example in her professional training seminars. The patterns Marcus had exhibited were apparently common enough that other financial professionals needed to understand how such systematic deception operated within families. Your case demonstrates how financial abuse can continue for years when the perpetrator has legitimate access to accounts and intimate knowledge of the victim's trust patterns. She explained during a follow-up consultation. Most people assume that financial fraud is obvious and dramatic, but the most damaging cases involve slow, systematic exploitation of trusted relationships.
The educational value of our experience had extended beyond academic settings into professional training for attorneys, accountants, and family counselors. Marcus's manipulation techniques were being studied and cataloged so that other professionals could recognize similar patterns in their own clients. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, our family therapist, had asked permission to include anonymized elements of our healing process in her research on children's recovery from parental betrayal. Her findings suggested that children who understood the truth about dysfunctional family dynamics actually recovered more quickly than those who were protected from difficult realities. Your children's emotional growth has exceeded typical recovery timelines because they were allowed to process the truth rather than being asked to maintain protective illusions, Dr. Mitchell explained during our final family session. Their ability to trust their own perceptions was preserved, which is crucial for developing healthy future relationships. The Sterling Family Foundation emerged from a simple realization during Nathan's junior year presentation on ethical business practices. We could transform Marcus's restitution payments and my consulting profits into educational opportunities that prevented similar suffering for other families. I love that Dad's fraud money will be used to teach people how to avoid fraud, Sophia observed with characteristic poetic justice. It's like turning poison into medicine. The Foundation's first scholarship recipients revealed how widespread domestic financial abuse actually was. Maria Santos from University of Florida had grown up watching her stepfather systematically drain her mother's inheritance. James Chen from Georgetown had witnessed his grandfather's exploitation by adult children who'd convinced him to transfer property ownership. Nathan's internship with the FBI's white-collar crime division provided disturbing insights into how common domestic financial abuse was. The agents here say it's one of the most underreported crimes in America, he reported. Most victims never pursue legal action because they don't realize what's happening is actually criminal. Sophia's art exhibition had evolved into a community event, drawing visitors from surrounding cities. Her series Reconstruction depicted rebuilding trust after systematic deception, while Lucas's science fair project analyzed statistical patterns in financial fraud cases. The consulting firm David and I had established was receiving recognition from professional organizations specializing in fraud prevention. The National Association of Fraud Examiners wants to feature our firm in their annual conference, David announced, noting their interest in my methodology for detecting long-term domestic financial abuse. Amanda Patterson's phone call came unexpectedly, her voice carrying both gratitude and determination. As Mrs. Patterson's granddaughter, she wanted to thank me for exposing Marcus's pattern of behavior, but had protected her grandmother from losing her home to his fabricated rent-to-own scheme. Grandma Eleanor told me about your case before she passed, Amanda explained. She said that if you hadn't exposed his behavior, she never would have thought to verify his legal documents. You saved her house. Mrs. Patterson had left a letter expressing hope that other families would be protected by the precedent our case had established. Her death, hastened by the stress of nearly falling victim to Marcus's sophisticated fraud, added urgency to our prevention work. The Foundation's scholarship recipients had formed an informal network of students who understood financial abuse through personal experience. Their research projects reflected deep commitment to preventing the suffering their own families had endured. Nathan's FBI work had contributed to federal guidelines for investigating domestic financial abuse. The patterns are so consistent, he explained. Isolation from financial decisions, gradual control over assets, false narratives about financial stress. Dad's playbook is standard operating procedure for financial predators. Sophia's art had caught attention from college recruiters, while Lucas's acceptance into an accelerated program at MIT reflected his determination to develop technology solutions for detecting financial manipulation. The invitation to testify about proposed domestic financial abuse legislation came through the National Association of Fraud Examiners. Our case had become a catalyst for legal reform, demonstrating how existing laws fail to address sophisticated manipulation within intimate relationships. Mrs. Sterling, your family's experience has become a reference point for understanding how existing laws fail to protect victims, Committee Chair Senator Patricia Williams explained. The proposed bill would establish domestic financial abuse as a distinct criminal category.
The most insidious aspect of domestic financial abuse is how it masquerades as family financial management, I testified. My ex-husband spent years convincing me that his control over my inheritance was protection rather than theft. Nathan provided supporting testimony about federal case patterns, while Sophia's art installation, Invisible Chains, visualized the psychological impact of financial control for Capitol visitors. The opposition's arguments revealed exactly why specialized legislation was necessary. Defense attorneys conflated legitimate financial disagreements with systematic deception, demonstrating how traditional legal frameworks failed to distinguish between normal marital stress and criminal manipulation. Marcus's continued legal harassment from jail, filing frivolous motions and appeals, illustrated the ongoing impact of his manipulative behavior even after conviction. Northwestern University's graduation ceremony took place on a brilliant May morning that seemed designed for celebrating new beginnings. Nathan walked across the stage to receive his degree in business ethics with summa cum laude honors, his thesis on domestic financial abuse prevention having earned recognition from the university's business school as outstanding undergraduate research. "Mom, I've been accepted to the FBI's Financial Crimes Training Program," Nathan announced during the graduation reception, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who'd found their professional calling. "They want me to specialize in domestic financial abuse cases because of my research background and personal understanding of how these crimes operate." The FBI position represented validation of Nathan's transformation from victim to advocate. His childhood experience with his father's manipulation had evolved into expertise that would protect other families from similar betrayal. The Bureau specifically valued his ability to recognize manipulation techniques that might not be obvious to investigators without personal experience. Delilah and Ryan attended the graduation ceremony, their presence reflecting how our extended family had evolved beyond Marcus's manipulation into genuine mutual support. Their own children, now toddlers, would grow up understanding healthy financial relationships rather than the secrecy and control that had characterized their parents' previous experiences. "Nathan's achievement feels like justice," Delilah observed during the reception dinner. "Marcus tried to destroy your family's future, but instead his behavior motivated Nathan to build a career protecting other families. It's poetic justice on a generational scale." Sophia's acceptance to Rhode Island School of Design came with a full scholarship based on her portfolio's powerful commentary on family dynamics and recovery from trauma. Her artistic development had progressed from personal healing to social advocacy, using visual storytelling to communicate complex psychological concepts. "I want to focus on art therapy and social justice," Sophia explained as we toured the RISD campus together. "My work has shown me how art can help people process experiences that are too complex for words alone. I want to develop programs that help families heal from financial abuse and other forms of manipulation." Her senior art exhibition at Westbrook Heights High School had drawn visitors from surrounding states who'd heard about her sophisticated exploration of trust, betrayal, and reconstruction. The school's art department planned to feature her work in their permanent collection as an example of how personal experience could be transformed into universal artistic communication. Sophia's art demonstrates resilience in visual form, her high school art teacher noted during the exhibition opening. "She's taken family trauma and transformed it into wisdom that can benefit anyone who sees her work. That's the highest form of artistic achievement."
Lucas, now 16 and preparing for his junior year of high school, had been accepted into a summer program at MIT that focused on developing technology solutions for social problems. His project proposal involved creating software that could identify patterns of financial manipulation in bank records, essentially building early warning systems for domestic financial abuse. I want to develop algorithms that can recognize when someone's financial behavior changes in ways that suggest external control, Lucas explained during his program interview. Most people don't realize they're being financially manipulated until significant damage has occurred. Technology could identify problems earlier and alert people to seek help. His approach combined mathematical precision with ethical awareness that reflected our family's journey from victimization to advocacy. Lucas had inherited analytical abilities from both parents, but his moral development had been shaped by witnessing the consequences of his father's choices.
Lucas represents the next generation of fraud prevention, noted Dr. Patricia Morgan, the MIT program director. He understands both the technical and human aspects of financial manipulation, which is crucial for developing effective technological solutions. The Sterling Family Foundation had grown beyond scholarship provision into direct advocacy and educational programming. We'd established partnerships with universities, law enforcement agencies, and social service organizations to create comprehensive approaches to domestic financial abuse prevention and recovery. Victoria, we've reached a point where the foundation needs dedicated staff rather than volunteer management, David advised during our quarterly board meeting. The demand for our programs has exceeded what we can handle while maintaining our consulting practice. The decision to hire professional staff reflected the foundation's evolution from personal healing project to significant social service organization. Our scholarship program now supported over 50 students annually. Our educational materials were used by law enforcement agencies across 12 states, and our advocacy work had contributed to legislative changes in 6 states. I want to ensure that we maintain focus on actual impact rather than organizational growth, I told the board. The foundation exists to prevent other families from experiencing what we went through, not to become a large nonprofit that loses sight of its mission. Marcus's latest manipulation attempt involved reaching out to Nathan's graduation committee with claims that he'd been unfairly excluded from his son's academic achievements. His letter to the university suggested that family estrangement was preventing him from celebrating his child's success, carefully omitting any mention of his criminal convictions or the reasons for our separation. Dad sent me a graduation card with a check that bounced, Nathan reported with the weary amusement of someone who'd learned to expect disappointment. He also included a letter about how proud he is of my achievements and how he hopes we can rebuild our relationship now that I'm an adult. The attempted reconciliation followed Marcus's established pattern of approaching his children during significant life events, hoping that emotional occasions would lower their defenses against his manipulation. His timing was calculated to exploit natural desires for paternal approval during milestone moments. It's interesting how Dad still thinks that grand gestures can substitute for consistent character, Sophia observed when Nathan shared the graduation card incident. He's offering congratulations for achievements that happened despite his behavior, not because of his support. Lucas's response was characteristically direct. Dad acts like being related to us gives him the right to claim credit for our success, even though he spent years trying to destroy Mom's ability to support our education and opportunities. The consulting firm David and I had built was receiving national recognition for innovative approaches to fraud prevention and family financial education. Our methodology had been adopted by law enforcement agencies, family court systems, and social service organizations across the country. Victoria, the Department of Justice wants to feature our domestic financial abuse training program in their National Law Enforcement Education Initiative. They're requesting permission to adapt our materials for federal use and to include our case study in their training curriculum. The federal recognition represented acknowledgement that our family's painful experience had been transformed into expertise that could protect others on a national scale. Marcus's betrayal had inadvertently contributed to systemic change that would benefit thousands of families.
I sometimes wonder if this is what justice actually looks like, I reflected during our team meeting. Not just punishment for the perpetrator, but transformation of the damage into protection for future victims. Marcus's crime became the foundation for crime prevention. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Marcus had intended to use my family's resources for his selfish pleasure, but his betrayal had ultimately resulted in those same resources being used to protect other families from similar manipulation. His theft had been transformed into generational giving that would outlast any temporary satisfaction he might have gained from his schemes. The Hart Senate Office Building hosted my testimony before the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on federal domestic financial abuse legislation. Our case had contributed to legislative changes in 14 states, and now bipartisan support existed for national standards. Domestic financial abuse destroys families through systematic deception that existing fraud statutes cannot adequately address, I testified, while Nathan provided supporting evidence from his FBI financial crimes work. Sophia's graduate thesis exhibition at RISD, Invisible Violence, The Art of Financial Abuse, had drawn national attention and acquisition by the Smithsonian Institution. Lucas's software for detecting financial manipulation patterns showed 94% accuracy and attracted interest from major banks. The Sterling Family Foundation had evolved into a national organization supporting over 200 students annually, with educational materials used by law enforcement and social service organizations across the country. Marcus's final downfall came through creating a fake charity that solicited donations for domestic violence prevention while using funds for personal expenses. The 5-year federal prison sentence effectively ended his ability to manipulate new victims. Dad's fake charity used photos from actual domestic violence organizations without permission, Nathan reported. He was literally stealing survivor stories to enable his own fraudulent fundraising. The children's responses reflected complete emotional separation from their father's choices. They no longer felt responsible for his actions, having learned to distinguish between family loyalty and enabling destructive behavior. The dedication ceremony for the Eleanor Patterson Memorial Garden took place on a perfect October morning at our beach house, the same deck where Marcus had signed his final plea agreement, and where our family had found peace after years of manipulation and betrayal. The garden honored Mrs. Patterson and other elderly victims of financial fraud, funded by the Sterling Family Foundation and designed by Ryan Hayes as his contribution to fraud prevention advocacy. Amanda Patterson spoke at the dedication, her voice carrying the strength of someone who'd transformed grief into purpose. Grandma Eleanor would be amazed to see how exposing one man's fraud has protected so many other families. She always said that the best response to cruelty is creating something beautiful that outlasts the damage. The memorial garden featured native coastal plants chosen for their resilience and beauty, surrounding a granite bench inscribed with words Mrs. Patterson had written before her death. Trust carefully, love wisely, and never let someone else's weakness diminish your own strength. Nathan attended the ceremony in his FBI dress uniform, his career having advanced to supervising a national task force on domestic financial abuse. His work had contributed to over 300 prosecutions and recovered millions of dollars for victims nationwide. Mrs. Patterson's case was one of the first I worked on as a new agent, Nathan addressed the gathered crowd. It taught me that financial fraud isn't just about money, it's about the destruction of trust that enables healthy communities to function. Sophia's latest art installation surrounded the memorial garden, titled Resilience in Bloom. The pieces depicted the process of healing and growth that followed exposure to manipulation, using organic forms that suggest both fragility and strength. Art has the power to transform pain into wisdom, Sophia explained to the documentary crew filming the dedication. This garden represents what's possible when people choose healing over bitterness, growth over revenge. Lucas, now a senior at MIT, had developed the technological framework for a national database that tracked patterns of financial elder abuse. His algorithms had been adopted by federal agencies and were protecting vulnerable populations across the country. Technology can't replace human judgment, but it can provide early warning systems that help people recognize manipulation before significant damage occurs, Lucas told the assembled advocates and family members. As the memorial ceremony concluded and guests mingled on the beach house deck, I found myself reflecting on the decade-long journey from victim to advocate. The women who'd been dismissed as extra luggage had become someone whose expertise protected families nationwide from the kind of manipulation she'd survived. Marcus remained in federal prison, his parole date still 3 years away. His children sent him birthday cards out of basic human decency, but they'd built lives that had no room for his manipulation or self-pity. They'd learned to love the parts of themselves that came from him while rejecting the behaviors that had caused so much damage. The beach house had returned to its essential purpose as a sanctuary for family connection and healing. 4 generations of my family had found peace on these shores, and now it served as headquarters for a foundation that protected other families from financial manipulation.
Victoria, Helen Carter said as she prepared to leave the ceremony, I want you to know that watching your family heal from Marcus's betrayal has given hope to a lot of people. You've shown that it's possible to transform terrible experiences into something protective and beautiful. The observation captured something essential about our journey. We hadn't simply survived Marcus's manipulation, we'd transformed it into wisdom that protected others. His intended destruction had become the foundation for generational healing that would outlast any temporary satisfaction he'd gained from his schemes. The Gulf waves continued their eternal rhythm against the shore, indifferent to human drama, but constant in their promise that some things endure beyond individual betrayal. Love endures, truth endures. Justice, when pursued with patience and precision, endures longest of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.